topic today is language as a catalyst for polarisation and hate crimes, preventing another Christchurch. The March 2025 Christchurch 2.0 online threat against Muslim Australians underscores the urgent need to examine the role of language in inciting hatred and radical actions and shaping public perceptions. This seminar exposes law enforcement to tactics used by far-right extremists to radicalise society, particularly through the manipulation of religious identity to incite intergroup fear and mistrust, tactics that are especially relevant in the context of recent fake terrorism plots, fabricated attacks, and the defacement of places of worship. It provides insights for academics, policymakers, human rights advocates, and legal experts on how extremist discourse enables hate crimes with implications for legal frameworks, social cohesion, and community resilience. Focusing on the Great Replacement Manifesto published by the Australian Christchurch shooter before the 2019 mosque attacks in New Zealand, this seminar employs forensic discourse analysis to examine how far-right rhetoric dehumanises targets, fosters identity polarisation, and legitimises violence. Key themes also include the manifesto's embedding of conspiracy theories, its framing of immigrants and minorities as existential threats, and its strategic use of historical and religious narratives to polarise society and justify violence. Situating the manifesto within broader socio-political context, this analysis highlights how hate speech intersects with identity politics and digital propaganda, fueling radicalisation and social fragmentation. The seminar underscores the urgent need for policy interventions and educational initiatives to counteract dangerous speech and promote inclusive discourse, equipping stakeholders with linguistic tools to combat the proliferation of hate and violence in an increasingly polarised world. So without further ado, let me hand over now to Awni Etaywe to commence today's seminar.
Thank you so much, Adele, for this lovely and beautiful introduction. Thanks, everyone, for joining me today. Across the globe and in Australia, hateful and violent extremist discourse is escalating, fueled by identity-based disinformation, conspiratorial beliefs, and rising polarization. Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and anti-immigrant sentiment are intensifying. Thus, we have to protect our country, we have to protect our shared values and bonds. We have to understand what it means when politicians work or speak in tandem with far-right extremist discourse and white supremacist agendas to win their votes, and what the cost would be. This threatens cohesion, polarizes communities, and recruits our youth, with ASIO's warning about promotion of communal violence rising and politically motivated violence flashing red, recognizing how hateful and violent extreme discourse manipulates the perception of ordinary people and recruit them is vital, especially how language operates in this context. Welcome to this seminar where we'll deconstruct some linguistic and rhetorical strategies used in one case study we'll be exploring today. Through this case study, we'll examine how language operates to radicalize individuals, polarize societies, and incite hatred and violence. Finally, we'll discuss some implications for policy, society, and education. The Great Manifesto, the Great Replacement Manifesto, is a chilling example of how language can be weaponized to justify hatred and violence, which will be the focus of our today's meeting. Before we dive into that, I'd like to start by acknowledging all First Nations people across the lands on which we live and work, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. The agenda for today will be presenting a background and context to our talk today, deconstructing a manifesto, in the hope that it will help us understand how extremists operate. And I will finish off with some insights for a SETA community before I open the floor for Q&A. So the objectives are to explore a text embedding of far-right conspiracy theories, to uncover strategies for polarizing and destabilizing society through linguistic manipulation, and to discuss implications for policy, education, and community resilience against hate speech. A little bit of background and context. Between the 7th of March, 2025 and 17th of March, 2019. On the 7th of March 2025, a newly opened Australian Islamic house, Masjid al-Bayt al-Islami Mosque at Edmondson Park, reported a violent online threat from a 16-year-old threatener from regional Western Australia, who posted, "I'm going to Christchurch to this joint." This threat message was reported to Meta. Meta responded. This notification, the Meta's notification, said that that post hadn't breached the platform's community standards on violence. And we understand that this might be upsetting. You can unfollow, mute, or block. But that wasn't okay with the security agencies here in Australia. So they followed up with Meta. And later, Meta said, as reported by ABC, "We do not allow organizations or individuals that proclaim a violent mission or are engaged in violence to have a presence on our platform." The threatening Christchurch 2 comment was removed as soon as we became aware. Probably this gives us an idea about how effective online social media platform in countering hatred, hate speech, and violent extremism, and what we should be doing about it. Immediately after that threat was reported and the police caught up that threat, news all over Australia reported the incident, as well as some international media outlets. But what is Christchurch 2? Is there Christchurch 1? Okay. On the 15th of March 2019, 2 attacks took place in New Zealand, particularly Christchurch, by a 28-year-old Australian far-right extremist who attacked 2 mosques, the An-Nur and Linwood mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand. That led to the death of 51 people across 2 mosques. The Christchurch shooter live streamed the attack on Facebook a couple of minutes or a few minutes before he carried out the attack. That was a kind of orchestrating and widespreading his thoughts, his action to like-minded people, which was associated with the manifesto, which we'll be looking at today. He then allegedly posted a link to his Facebook account, enabling viewers to access the live stream and links to his manifesto. The shooter was convicted of terrorism, the murder of 51 people, and attempted murder of 40 people. And he is now serving a sentence of life imprisonment without parole. So the threat message that was shared on social media this year with a threatening of another Christchurch was referencing to this incident and to this manifesto. The manifesto that was shared by the shooter was classified by the New Zealand Authority as objectionable content. So wherever we found it or we find it online, should be taken down, should be deleted, shouldn't be shared, but it can be used by academic researchers and analysts, as well as reporters seeking to inform the public, which is our task today. The manifesto is an 87-page long. It is considered a blueprint for far-right extremism and promotes dangerous speech and extremist ideologies. It polarizes and divides society and inspires and radicalizes people. And these functions were reported in the New Zealand report as well. The New Zealand report mentioned that this document is intended to inspire and persuade like-minded people, as what happened with that 16-year-old threatener in Sydney. The seminar looks at relevant linguistic and rhetorical strategies that might have inspired that man, as well as other people in the USA and Europe. The Great Replacement theory, originally espoused by the French author Renaud Camus, seems to be informing the messages in this manifesto, which carried the same name, the Great Replacement. So they feed each other. The Great Replacement theory, originally espoused by French author Renaud Camus, is a debunked white supremacist far-right conspiracy theory. It claims that white population in Europe and the West are being systematically replaced by non-white immigrants, including those coming from Muslim-majority countries, through mass migration, higher birth rates, and declining birth rates among European people, allegedly facilitated by replacist elites, including NGOs that facilitate the migration movement. This theory frames demographic change as a white genocide and uses dehumanizing terms such as invaders, etc., to incite fear and resentment. So the manifesto appears to carry the same name, and the front cover of the manifesto features a pagan European symbol co-opted by the Nazi in the mid-1930s, and now closely aligned with the new Nazi, new fascist, alternative right and white nationalist groups. And some of the symbols are used by new Nazi movements here in Australia, and this rings that bell regarding the anti-immigration protest that took place a couple of weeks ago, because they used messages that echoed with this replacement, and that should be a wake-up call. After that introduction, there were 18 pages of self-penned interview in the form of Q&A. So the shooter was asking questions to himself and responding, revealing his motives, reasoning, and ideology, followed by addresses to various groups, including messages to conservatives, to Christians, to Antifa, to Marxists, to Turks, communists, and so on. And that was followed by a section of general thoughts and potential strategies, and this is the real threat. Guiding people who are like-minded on what should be done and how to achieve change in society. Of course, we cannot look at the entire manifesto, but we can look at examples that help us understand what's going on in this manifesto. Deconstructing key aspects of the manifesto is the focus, and the start is with a CADS lens, that is corpus-assisted discourse studies lens. It is a linguistic lens used in forensic linguistics and other corpus-assisted discourses that help us focus our analysis on linguistic features that are characteristic of a text or corpus by comparing the text in hand with a reference corpus. And that can help us identify the keywords and the patterns, and then we zoom in on the functions of these patterns by studying the concordance lines in which they appear. So the keywords might be related to articles, might be related to conjunctions, which might not be relevant to our talk today. So what is relevant to our talk today are words that are less frequent. So Why focusing on less frequent words and not on the most frequent words? Because both are meaningful and both are considered salient and characteristic of this kind of text when compared with the reference text. So by focusing on words such as for, we can get insights into and investigative clues to justifications in the manifesto. By focusing on words such as racial, future, children, race, support, immigrants, and the context in which they were used, we can also get insights into what is being talked about, that is the content itself, how it is being talked about in negative mode, and what kind of investigative clues we can draw from the analysis. Some of the clues might be related to the ideological schema, the agenda, and the extreme stance encoded in text, especially when we study the context in which keywords such as war, attack, hate, Europeans as participants, main participants in this discourse, immigrants as main participants in the discourse, invaders, who are the invaders, they, we, who are constructed as they and we, them and us, children of whom are being talked about in the context, white, European, white Christian, Western economy, and messages related to what should be done. Do, don't run from the fight, run towards the fight. Kill, messages related to killing specific people, groups of people, like kill Angela Merkel, kill Erdogan, kill high-profile enemies, etc. We must be ready to act. That this warlord must bleed his last, and so on. So that is the way into the start point into understanding this discourse. By grouping all these keywords, we can come up with key semantic domains related to ethnic identity being contested in discourse, the topic of replacement and threat, territorial and national anxiety, population and demography being at the heart of this discourse, cultural and moral decline arguments, radicalization, persuasion, mobilization, and incitement. But as I said, this gives us only a door to understand the text. What should be done then is the closed text reading, closed text analysis to how these topics, how these themes, how these words, and how these strategies are used. First of all, we start with the fact that this text embeds far-right conspiracy theory to validate identity-based claims and negative evaluations of outgroups and members of our groups. The manifesto says this crisis of mass immigration and sub-replacement fertility is an assault on the European people that will ultimately result in the complete racial and cultural replacement of the European people. Such statements encapsulate the Great Replacement theory, which portrays immigration as a deliberate plot against white population. What is worse is picturing what is going on as, or portraying it as, white genocide, dramatizing the theory, evoking fear and inciting panic and legitimizing extreme. So there is a kind of conflation of mass immigration with birth rights, birth rate, etc. But what is the connection between these in logical words is not established in this discourse. And this should be one of the areas where educators can help deconstruct this kind of conflations. So the manifesto conflates demographic trends with deliberate action reinforcing conspiratorial thinking, especially when labeling immigrants as invaders who are killing and genociding our white people, and then calling to kill them, killing the overpopulation by doing so, saving our environment. What is the link between environment, overpopulation, and invaders? They consider overpopulation is one of the factors leading to the environmental issues, and they are now calling for green nationalism and ecofascism. So these are some of the discourses that are emerging from this white supremacist and far-right extremist discourse. We've got to remember that there are two main linguistic and rhetorical strategies used throughout the manifesto. And these are characteristic of hate speech in general. One, referential and predicational strategies, where language users use derogatory and dehumanizing terms, describing, for example, people as being gypsies, nigger, etc. And using negative traits when talking about, for example, the Jews, saying Jews are social parasites. Stereotyping, stigmatization, and derogatory language is characteristic of hate speech discourse. And these are evaluative and thus interpersonal meanings that serve to enact social relationships. Why they are focusing on evaluative language? Because it is interpersonal and it serves to enact interpersonal relationships and building a community of shared values against communities of unshared values. For more about how these tactics are used, you can refer to this article in particular. Another strategy used throughout the manifesto is the top one, that is the argumentative strategies. Mainly the topos of culture to justify violence against groups perceived as problematic from a cultural perspective, and the topos of threat, claiming that an influx of immigrants will overwhelm the native population. So these two topo are used often in this manifesto. The purpose is to forge alienation, the alienation of outgroups and their members, and forging in-group communion that is underpinned by shared values of loyalty to the in-group and care about harm being imposed on the in-group by outgroups. But how do these strategies operate at the discourse semantic and social level? A main strategy is manipulation. Manipulating the audience's perception of immigrants, of minorities, and manipulating the perception of the action required to solve this problem. And one of the tactics for this manipulation is dehumanizing, as I mentioned. So the far-right extremists here in the manifesto refer to immigrants as invaders, vipers, and roaches, evoking imagery of infestation and aggression, positioning immigrants as threats rather than individuals, and framing them as a faceless threat to Western society. This serves to divide the society between us and them as well, the human and less human groups. Another tactic of manipulation is the use of symbols, symbolism, and urgency. As in the case of using very popular poems by Dylan Thomas, very extremist language used in his poems. And this use of symbols is followed by calls for actions, such as we must crush immigration and deport those invaders already living in our soil. The repetition of phrases such as it's the birth rates, it's the birth rates, it's the birth rates, again emphasizes an immediate crisis to which we should pay attention and respond. So this kind of manipulation is achieved through symbolism and urgency, but also used by constructing immigrants as existential threats. This strategy of threat construction exaggerates the impacts of immigration to suggest it will lead to the annihilation of the in-group. The manifesto says, before we deal with the fertility rates, we must deal with both the invaders within our lands and invaders that seek to enter our lands. How they are doomed to deal with that. So after manipulating the perception of the immigrants, then they will communicate the how. They will never conquer our lands, and they will never replace our people. And this kind of language paints immigrants again as aggressors and in a zero-sum conflict. So no negotiation and no coming into peaceful terms with the immigrants. It is a zero-sum conflict. This, of course, contributes to the identity polarization in society and identity fusion. What do I mean by that? Here I refer to the fact that the individual's identity becomes fused into the group identity, especially after perceiving that the essence of a group and the values of the group are at risk, and the only way to protect that is by action. So the action of the individuals become merged in the group and considered as a way to protect the group, even by accepting death to do that. So again, talking about threat construction that contributes to building a binary narrative between us and them. White Europeans are depicted as the oppressed, morally righteous victims, and immigrants as dangerous, culturally incompatible oppressors, as in this example. Our people are being replaced, our culture destroyed, and our lands overtaken by foreigners. In relation to identity polarization, one of the ways that identity-based polarization is enacted in this discourse is by rejecting any democratic solution. They believe in violence as a response. Diversity is not a strength. Diversity is weakness, and unity is a strength, according to the manifesto. Here is a direct example coming from the manifesto. There is no democratic solution. In addition to that, these manipulation tactics are used and amplified online. When Meta responded that you can unfollow that threatener, it doesn't work because people are living in echo chambers and not open to other arguments in other spaces. They normalize extremism and they radicalize individuals through the kind of language and discussions they have there. So the internet is mentioned in the manifesto as the way to learn more about the fact and the truth from their perspective. And it is where they will find the truth and not anywhere else. So policymakers should pay attention to the internet and regulate the kind of objectionable content and pay attention to that by close collaboration with multidisciplinary experts. So in this regard, the manifesto combines far-right ideologies with populist rhetoric, claiming diversity is not a strength, unity, purpose, trust, traditions, nationalism, and racial nationalism provide strength. So these are the shared bonds and shared values being argued for in the manifesto. What about democracy? It's not shared value for them. And this is how threatening this kind of ideology and why we need to seriously respond and deconstruct this kind of language. Otherwise, more and more young people will get manipulated. So according to the manifesto, multiculturalism, diversity, egalitarianism, individualism are all unshared bonds. But for us, the mainstream people, the majority, it is these are the shared bonds, and we need to act in order to protect our democratic values and shared bonds. Again, He gives examples that look at the United States, look at this country and that country where diversity is leading to chaos, blaming immigrants again and diversity for that chaos. And we hear every now and then Elon Musk commenting on diversity in the UK and blaming the immigrants for the economic problems taking place there. And again, in the manifesto, the author presents other examples like China, saying, why is it that what gives Western nations strength, that is diversity, is not what gives Eastern nations their strength? How are they so strong? Talking about China being stronger than the United States, etc. And he accounts that for diversity or lack thereof. Again, he talks about the idea that all it takes for a Han Chinese man to become German is to be born on German soil is an insane, as a German born on Mars, becoming a Martian. So he uses that kind of language as a tactic of argumentation to convince people that, well, it shouldn't be the case. So Europe, America, Australia, and elsewhere should be only for the white, not for anyone born here or getting their citizenship in any other way. So Europe's value is in the European people. This is the main focus here. And that's why we need to focus on deconstructing values and bonds in this dangerous speech and to instill hope in shared values, particularly democratic values and civil rights. So through this kind of language, the author is rationalizing their radical actions. So what is the response to all this chaos that is caused by diversity, multiculturalism, etc.? So the manifesto says it is the radicalization of young Western men, and that is unavoidable and inevitable. A teenager or young person reading this manifesto, going through all these brainwash and manipulation, might reach the conclusion that, yes, I need to take action because I'm part of this group, and this is the desired and required action. So the manifesto emphasizes that radicalization is the rational response to degeneration. Another tactic for manipulation is fear-mongering, using claims that immigrants will destroy our community, destroy our ethnic binds, destroy our cultures, destroy our peoples. You see the repetition of the word destroy and the negative polarity of it, coupled with the immigrants. Another tactic of manipulation is strategic framing. And this serves to manipulate how events or ideas are perceived, and often by presenting actions as logical and morally necessary. So in a way to radicalize and prescribe what should be done, the author says we must crush immigration and deport those invaders already living on our soil. So again, immigrants are framed strategically as invaders, portraying violence as a necessary and justified solution to prevent alleged cultural and racial annihilation. The manifesto references other historical and religious events to make the argument sound more convincing. Here, for example, the author intensifies the message by historical analogies like the reference to the Ottoman Empire in Europe, saying we are coming for Constantinople and we will destroy every mosque and minarets in the city. So that threat in New South Wales against the mosque can be understood in this light. This reference to historical conflicts between Christians and Muslims positions modern immigration as a continuation of historical struggles. Historical narratives of Pope Urban II at the time of the First Crusade also were used and contextualized in this manifesto. Again, negatively portraying Muslims as the Saracens respects neither the virgins of the Lord nor the colleges of priests. And then he says, let our lives be stronger than death to fight against the enemies of the Christian people, in a direct message to the Christian. He says to Christians, ask yourself, what would Pope Urban II do? So after incorporating that kind of narrative of the First Crusade. A very important strategy used in this hate discourse is incitement, inciting hatred and violence. After manipulating the perception of the realities, now comes what should be done. And this is achieved through incitement. Incitement can be to violent actions and can be to non-violent actions, which covers incitement to hatred, incitement to discrimination, and incitement to persecution, which involves calling for systematic exclusion of the victim group from society and civil rights. And incitement can be opaque, indirect, using metaphor. In this case, again, the immigrants are portrayed as enemies, constructed as a threat. They are being dehumanized as a nest of vipers. When you discover a nest of vipers in your yard, do you spare the adolescents? Do you allow them to grow freely, openly, to one day bite your child as they play in their own yard? No. You burn the nest and kill the vipers, no matter the age. Opaque, but is clear in the context of the manifesto. So he is portraying the immigrants as vipers, their children and the immigrant families as nest of vipers that deserve to be burnt down or killed. And this is prescribed as a measure of prevention. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Incitement is also merged with threatening messages, with threat messages in the manifesto. The manifesto, for example, says, we are coming for Constantinople and we'll destroy every mosque and minaret in the city. The Hagia Sophia will be free of minarets and Constantinople will be rightly Christian-owned once more. This explicitly incites destruction of Muslim religious symbols and sites, linking it to historical grievances. So the far-right extremist hijacks grievances or perceived grievances in order to serve and present them as bonds that should be protected. It frames the loss of Christian symbols as an enduring betrayal that requires rectification through violence again. Talking to the Turks, Muslim Turks, he says, if you attempt to live in European lands, anywhere west of the Bosphorus Bridge or Strait, we will kill you and drive you roaches from our lands. This is a very clear threat, but it is an incitement to followers and like-minded people to do this after his sentence, of course. This is the text where it was used. Clear message to Turks. There are also incitements against individuals, against families, and against specific organizations. And this gives clues for investigations by law enforcement agencies to the likely or the potential victims or targets of this violence that should be protected. Here we say, we see this message from the manifesto. The only Muslim I truly hate is the convert. Turned their back on their traditions and became blood traitors to their own race. These I hate. So his hate message is directed directly addressing non-Muslims who became Muslims. So that is one of the groups targeted by far-right extremists. in a call for radicalization and using radical actions in that within that context of incitement. Again, the manifesto uses poems by Rudyard Kipling, a lot of hate speech embedded into some of the lines there, as in, when time shall count from the date that the Saxon began to hate. Again, he uses specific symbols and poems to emphasize the message of hatred, and that hatred is historical, and we shouldn't be feeling shamed by what we are doing. So again, talking about incitement. Incitement was directed at individuals, such as kill Angela Merkel, kill Erdogan, kill Sadiq Khan. And the means of violence were prescribed. TATP packages strapped to drones, an EFP in a motorcycle saddlebags, and so on. Ambush them. So the tactics of carrying out all these violent actions are mentioned there. Why to do that? Why to attack these individuals? Because of their identity. That's why I started by identity-based disinformation and identity-based polarization. Here in incitement against Erdogan, for example, he mentions that Erdogan, the leader of one of the oldest enemies of our people, and the leader of the largest Islamic group within Europe. This landlord must plead his last. What about the mayor of London? Sadiq Khan. Sadiq Khan, the current mayor of London at the time of writing, an open sign of disenfranchisement and ethnic replacement of the British people in the British Isles. This Pakistani Muslim invader now sits as a representative for the people of London. See the kind of identity-based polarization and incitement used in this discourse. Where is the incitement message? What better sign of the white rebirth than the removal of this invader? And then he says, kill Sadiq Khan. Okay, that is a direct message against specific leaders. There were direct incitement to violence against specific groups and their families. Children of invaders do not stay children. Any invader you kill of any age is one less enemy your children will have to face. It is a direct message to attack even children. And there was a message of encouragement for imitation, to follow the footsteps of the Christchurch shooter. The manifesto presents the author's actions as a guide for others, stating, make your plans, get training, form alliances, get equipped, and then act. But where to find these targets? One of the keywords in the manifesto is cities. So he is directing and inciting for like-minded people to attack people in cities. The countryside can't wait, but big cities are now hosting more and more immigrants. Retake the cities, retake your birthright. More targets incited against are the NGOs and organizations supporting immigrants. NGOs are directly involved in the genocide of the European people, according to the manifesto. And these NGOs are modern money changers, according to the manifesto, and they are traitor organizations that should be targeted. Continuing the process of manipulation of perception of organizations here. Crush these traitor NGOs, kill their leadership, burn down their buildings. These are the incitement messages against these NGOs. And this can give us investigative clues to the potential targets of those extremists. A section in that manifesto, which should be really paid attention to, is about destabilization and accelerationism, tactics for change. They are prescribed as tactics for change, after saying that, after claiming that radicalization is inevitable. So what these tactics are? First of all, linguistically speaking, the author is fomenting crises through calls for destabilization as a tool for change. True change, and the change we need to enact only arises in the great crucible of crisis. So he's calling to create more crises in the society, so that people and the society get destabilized and people start joining or believing in that extremist cause. Stability and comfort are the enemies of revolutionary change. Therefore, we must destabilize and discomfort society. And we should see new Nazi movements, protests that use this kind of language in this light, calling for destabilization and accelerationism. To accelerate the change, particular violent actions should be carried out. These include, according to this section in particular, political subversion. So the manifesto incites political subversion. As in this example, it is far better to encourage radical, violent change regardless of its origins. How? By electing extremist politicians. This is one of their tactics. And this can explain some of the close ties between some politicians and far-right extremists and neo-Nazi movements, even not condemning what the neo-Nazi movements are doing or white supremacists. Another tactic for change is radicalizing public discourse and targeting leaders. Actions are prescribed as follows: radicalizing public discourse by vilifying, radicalizing, and exaggerating all societal conflicts, or even assassinating weak or less radical leaders. So they are carefully working to make sure that only radicals and extremists are in charge. This call to violence against perceived moderate or ineffective leaders aims to escalate societal tensions and promote polarization, making moderate solutions and democratic solutions appear impossible. Another tactic for change is amplifying social conflicts by exploiting public spaces. And here we need to pay attention and try to question the fake incidents according to the Australian Federal Police. Fake incidents related to fake terrorism plots in Sydney and Melbourne. So in this manifesto, the author calls for canvass public areas in support of radical positions, even if they are not your own. So the point is not supporting our representatives. The point is creating destabilization and accelerationism. Another tactic is place posters near public parks calling for Sharia law. Then in the next week, place posters over such posters calling for the expulsion of all immigrants. Repeat in every area of public life until the crisis arises. Prescription. If we don't understand this kind of language, it will be difficult to counter hate crimes. So this strategy creates the illusion of widespread societal division, forcing individuals to pick sides and intensifying polarization. These are some examples related to the AFP report of fake terrorism plots in New South Wales, graffiti, anti-Semite graffiti in Melbourne, cancel Islam messages here in Australia as well, and more graffiti in Melbourne against Muslim women. Get out, Muslim, death to Palestine, etc., in relation to what's going on, or plausible genocide in Gaza. Another tactic of manipulation is related to psychological manipulation and social manipulation, of course, which we've been talking about so far. Psychological manipulation is related to steering fear, fear-based reactions to political decisions that heighten societal divisions, as in this statement. A vote for a radical candidate that opposes your values and incites agitation or anxiety in your own people works far more in your favor than a vote for a moderate politician, for example, or someone who doesn't enact the radical change that we are working for. So there's a clear call for supporting radical representatives. A political candidate that keeps the status quo or only seeks to introduce minimal change is ultimately useless, rejecting incremental change in favor of supporting radical change. Vote for political candidates that radically change and challenge entrenched systems. These are some of the messages related to the voting system. So it's not about manipulating perception, but also manipulating actions in society, including encouraging division in voting patterns. In a kind of psychological manipulation, the manifesto also seeks to make conflict self-perpetuating by radicalizing individuals and communities and passing over the flag to like-minded people in clear calls for action. So the author here, again, incites like-minded people to destabilize the society as an initial step to taking over and controlling. If we want to radically and fundamentally change society, then we need to radicalize society as much as possible. Do not fear change. We are the change. So the individual's work becomes fused and merged into the in-group existence, values, and so on. What do we learn from this kind of language related to manipulation and incitement to hatred and violence, and of course, explicit tactics calling for accelerationism and destabilization? The manifesto reveals a calculated effort to destabilize society, foster division, and incite hatred and violence. Understanding the strategies and whether the linguistic or rhetorical strategies used is crucial for developing countermeasures to combat hate speech and extremism. A potential counter strategy could involve dissecting claims like mass immigration will lead to cultural annihilation and environmental catastrophe, etc., and deconstructing the links. So improving critical thinking skills among our students as educators is one thing, but also for the counter strategy designers and policymakers, they need to make sure that these linguistic and rhetorical strategies are paid attention to and deconstructed in order to inform the counter communication. A potential counter strategy could also involve taking the necessary measure to combat hate speech and prevent radicalization, and the calls, the explicit and implicit calls embedded in discourse. To combat this kind of discourse and radicalization, key areas of intervention should be considered. One is related to policy, where stricter regulation of online extremist content should be a goal, and implementing stronger regulations for monitoring and removing extremist material. For education, we need to enhance digital literacy to help individuals critically evaluate online content, specifically the strategies of manipulation of perception and manipulation of action. Manipulative tactics are very important to study and deconstruct. 3, in relation to our community, we need to foster inclusive community narratives to counteract hate-filled rhetoric. And we need to question the discourse, the political discourse that works in tandem with the hate speech and far-right extremist discourse. Any politician using the language that is echoing the great replacement theory or the far-right extremist discourse shouldn't be welcome and should be challenged. The Great Replacement Manifesto exemplifies how language can be weaponized to radicalize individuals and destabilize societies. And therefore, multidisciplinary insights into forensic cases such as this one is paramount. In any analysis of a violent extremist case where language and linguistic data is part of the evidence, we should pay attention to the discursive prosody around main participants, such as immigrants, white, European, etc. The immigrants here, for example, are consistently portrayed overtly negatively and seen in collocates, words that accompany them in context, such as destroy, high fertility, refuse, invaders, radicalized, despised, and so on. We also need to pay attention to the linguistic strategies used in conspiratory racialization, linking immigrants to high fertility and cultural corrosion, for example. How is that achieved? As well as portraying immigrants as the aggressor and natives as victims in a victim-villain reversal. Reversal strategy is common in this kind of discourse. We also need to pay attention to moral panic tropes that represent immigrants, for example, as a threat to societal, demographic, and cultural stability, especially when contextualizing that within the historical and religious context. We need to focus on salient patterns. Why? Because they are the lens or the way into the data, and it offers a lens on priming and cumulative evaluative framing. But particular participants being negatively framed again and again and again, that is done for particular function in that context. So readers might be primed through repetition and evaluative predication. Cumulatively, readers might be cumulatively positioned to view immigrants not as problematic, but as existential threat. And readers might be offered pseudo-rational justification for violence, and we need to deconstruct these tactics of justification in order to secure and to protect our children. This pattern aligns with a lot of critical discourse analysis work around legitimation strategy, and it is linguistic par excellence, emphasizing the value of having multidisciplinary team when addressing any violent extremist or hateful extremist case. We need to learn that polarization is not only about portraying us and them image. It's also about group engagement and political alignment, shaping shared goals while constructing that binary opposition between the in-group and out-group in a black versus white dichotomy. More attention should be paid to ambient polarization, where there is no interaction between people, but people can read the text and they become polarized and radicalized without live interaction. This kind of polarization helps us describe how extremist texts, despite lacking interactional reciprocity, discursively construct stark oppositions that reinforce group identity and moral justification for violence. This dynamic is not only behavioral, but also ideational and interpersonal, as language constructs the conditions for action-based convergence. Before I conclude, we need to remember that hate speech is rooted in prejudice and a lack of appreciation of diversity, cultural differences, and diverging opinions. Those attitudes and stances are learned and can be unlearned. And the study and the close analysis of attitudes encoded in discourse is very important towards achieving this goal. We need to focus on encoded extreme attitudes to help us identify and counter hate crimes in a timely manner. And we need to learn that without fostering, learning, or upholding negative attitudes towards social groups, there would be no basis for hatred. So we need to address these attitudes encoded in discourse. And we need to remember that politicians need to be careful when using language for political gains. When political and social leaders default to rhetoric that marginalizes our groups and reinforces in-group identities, they help mainstream and legitimize these corrosive linguistic systems in this hateful and violent extremist discourse. With this, I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and I would be more than happy to listen to your questions and comments, especially around how to better protect our community with all this in mind. Thank you.
Can we have a round of applause? Thank you, Dr. I have a mic with me if anyone wants to make a comment or questions. For online attendees, I'll read out the questions. Anyone?
Awni. Thank you. Masalam. Subhanallah. Sorry, my Arabic's very bad. So I looked at obviously some of the opposite stuff, which was coming out of some of the Muslim extremists and stuff like that. So it's interesting to see some of the arguments. So just as sort of, I know we've spoken before about the Takfiri group that want to be violent and accuse other Muslims of not being violent enough. Just in your analysis of that stuff, like with the right-wing extremists, is there also this group that say, oh, look, the mainstream are not aggressive enough, they're letting this happen? Is there that type of group there, this kind of vanguard, this small group that say, well, we've got to instigate the revolution? Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Well, thanks for the comment in relation to the jihadist and Takfir groups. Yeah, so I've done some work there, but this is not the focus of today. And thank you for the lovely question as well. Yes, it is clear in this manifesto in particular, as an example, where the perpetrator of the Christchurch event is presenting himself as a model, an example to follow, and inciting, according to his words, fellow Christians, white Europeans, so on, to do the same, because the rest of the white Europeans are waiting for change, and don't wait for others. You are the change, and people will join you when they see people guiding them and leading them. So they're presenting themselves as leaders in this kind of radical change, and the vanguard or the lead into what is coming. The new Nazi movements using similar kind of language to rally and to encourage people to come in larger numbers in protests. Also have that idea in mind, as recent investigation found, that they are calling for anti-immigration protests, but they are not revealing their agenda, their neo-Nazi agenda. And then the investigation found that all the protests around Australia were orchestrated in a way or another, or facilitated by some people who are linked to neo-Nazi movements. So they are trying to make use of these perceived grievances and hijack them and present them as bonds that we should collectively protect, even through radical actions, and they present themselves as movements for the necessary change. They start with smaller numbers, but they hope to control the mainstream media, the mainstream education system, the voting system, and so on. Yes, they present themselves as vanguards and the leading people in this direction. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Very inspiring, and I can't stop thinking about what, in general, you probably say an Australian public was still very positive by not electing a party, accusing another party being weak as water, which actually was a very interesting rhetorical term used by Peter Dutton last election, because for many other non-European cultures, water actually is the strongest element rather than the weak element. But the using of the word and many other words they actually used during the election campaign actually is very similar to what we have just seen as the example you pick up. But and also the way they're actually targeting migrants to this country. But what I have been thinking about, I don't know what you are thinking about. This is quite interesting. Many of these white supremacism came from Europe, where white people there were considered as native. But here's Australia. This is the invaders and the colonizers calling other people come to this country. And I were not surprised, also calling those indigenous people in this country as invaders as well. Perhaps that's exactly their mentality of colonizing the world. Actually believe everyone is trying to colonize the rest of the earth. And I don't know what do you think about that, but I can't stop thinking about it.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you for this comment and question following that. Yeah. Well, I think it is not Australia-specific phenomenon. It is beyond that. The great replacement theory and many conspiratorial theories came from Europe. So the great replacement book itself was authored by a Frenchman. And many of these conspiratorial theories are fed in the United States and spread around the world through the internet and through creating connections, decentralized groups across Europe, Australia, and elsewhere. So they share the same ideology. So the same kind of language that you may come across on Front Storm platform, for example, will be found in the Great Replacement Manifesto. Or the Great Replacement is Reality speech, which was soon after it was shared on X platform. It attracted over 5 million views in 2 days. And I think now tens and tens of millions of views for the same video by those who believe in this theory. So it's not about Australia, it's about colonial heritage. It's about the West and the rest kind of ideology. And it is a theory that is taught and ideas that are indoctrinated in different parts of the world. Yeah, I agree with you that many of the linguistic features and the language that is appearing in this manifesto and elsewhere way similar to those used by politicians in Australia and elsewhere. Yeah, of course, we can understand that. Trump recently, for example, hijacked the event of the Charlie Kirk assassination to call Antifa as a terrorist group. And in this manifesto in particular, we see a message directed at the Antifa in particular, the anti-fascism group. It is a requirement for the far-right extremists and white supremacists to get rid of the Antifa. And the close links between Trump administration and white supremacist voters can raise doubts about the decision about adding Antifa or blacklisting Antifa as a terrorist group. Yeah, there is a lot in convergence there, and we shouldn't give up. We should always hold to the shared values of justice, equality, and all civil rights and legal rights, of course, because this is the only way forward. If we give up and we give them the platform, they may control everything. So unless they use the democratic terms, I think we shouldn't rest, and we should continue the fight against terrorism, extremism, whether that is hateful extremism or violent extremism.
Thanks, Arnie. That was excellent. And thank you for reminding us of just how precious language is in creating our world. I was thinking about some of the incentives that you put forward. And I heard yesterday this saying, when hate is loud, make love louder. And I'm wondering where inciting love might fit among some of our responses to hate and extremism. And if people are already inciting love, why is it not really acting as combative or offering us solutions in ways that could be more effective?
Yeah, thank you. That is a very important question, which emphasizes the fact that we need an alternative path, an alternative discourse. And here in Australia, we have the Australian Systemic Functional Linguistics Association that has launched the special interest group on peace, compassion, and empathy, which is working hard to develop discourses and guidelines on how to design discourses of peace, compassion, and empathy. And that not only at the interpersonal level, but at the organizational level and at interstate level. Of course, that should be part of a package that instills hope, love, and systemic compassion, while, of course, tackling this violent extremist and hateful extremist discourse. Yes, I agree that we need to promote this kind of discourse as the pathway and the way ahead. And it is the responsibility of not only the government, but also educational institutions, civil society, all NGOs. So we need to work harder towards using more positive discourse, in other terms, instead of this negative and hateful discourse. I believe that the government cannot tackle all this by itself. It is the responsibility of the society. And democracy and democratic values at the end of the day is about it's about a system that is run by the people, for the people. If the collectives and the people decide not to step in, not to interfere, this is not my business, then we will collectively lose the battle for peace and compassion. So we need to work at the individual level and the collective level, and society level, towards tackling this kind of hateful discourse, extremist discourse, and towards pushing for more compassionate discourse. A balance should be maintained, and it's not a security issue per se, but it's a social issue as well. So civil society can contribute to that, for sure.
Thank you so much, Dr. Awni, for that awe-inspiring, amazing presentation. I was quite frankly shocked to know about the how language is actually instigating violence and hate crimes from a linguistic perspective. So thank you so much. And I want to thank Dr. Adele Saffron-Rowson as well for doing the presentation of the introductions. Thank you so much. And we will, at Northern Institute, we will see you with another People Policy Place seminar in next month. So stay tuned. Thank you so much.
Thank you.